it seems that the Tau Codex has leaked to the internet, so today let's do a full unit review for the Hammerhead and whether or not it lives up to the hype. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're doing a Tau video, and in particular I thought we'd do a datasheet review of the Hammerhead, perhaps one of the most interesting Tau units to come out of the new Codex, with that godly railgun that just cuts through just about anything. I'll certainly be hard at work at a full Codex review just as soon as I can get one out, but I thought in the meantime we might stop off and look at a datasheet or two, the Hammerhead seeming like a very good one to start with. In the video we'll talk about its datasheet in the new Codex, a few of the most obvious buffs and synergies that you can make it better with, a little math hammer as to how much you can really expect out of that tank-killing railgun, and then a bit more maths comparing the Hammerhead against its various competitors within the Codex. Plenty to talk about, so let's jump straight into it with a look at its new datasheet. So in the new Codex Tau, the Hammerhead is a heavy support choice for 145 points or 8 power. You can only take units of 1, and it has all the keywords that you'd expect: Sept, Fly, Hammerhead and Vehicle. Compared with its previous incarnation, it's seen a few changes in the stat line. It still moves 12 inches, but now it only hits on a ballistic skill of 4+. That seems to be a general shift throughout the Codex. Marker lights are a bit easier to come by now, so it should still be hitting on 3s quite a bit of the time. Otherwise, its strength 6, toughness 7, has gained a wound to 14 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3+ save. As per previous, it degrades in movement, ballistic skill and attacks. In particular, the ballistic skill is a bit painful, going down to ballistic skill 5 and 6+ as it takes damage. The main event are of course its mighty weapons. The railgun that everyone's been talking about is a 72-inch range weapon, heavy 1 at strength 14, AP -6 and damage D3 + 6, has the very scary power of just slamming straight through enemy invul saves, and also if it wounds the enemy, you also deal 3 mortal wounds to the unit. It works really well with the Hammerhead's special rule of re-rolling 1 hit roll each time the model shoots, so unless there's any -1 to hits going on, it should usually be hitting something at least 3/4 of the time, if not better with a marker light. We'll take a look at its damage output in a second, but in general, if it does punch a wound through, it's going to be doing somewhere between 10 and 12 wounds to an enemy tank, and if you're targeting elite infantry, those mortal wounds also help out quite a bit as well. You will be able to fry one model with the main shot, and then the extra one should splash around and cause a bit more damage. I feel like it probably is the better choice over the ion cannon right now. The ion cannon actually costs more, and it gives you a 60-inch range, heavy 3d3, strength 7, AP -2 and damage 2, and of course you have the ability to overcharge it for strength 8 and damage 3. That profile does make it a very general purpose weapon, but against a lot of key targets it's really not all that far behind the railgun, either due to having relatively low AP, the effects of -1 damage on it, or the fact that the railgun also gets those mortal wounds, which certainly narrows the gap against infantry, which otherwise would be quite severe. Otherwise you can take 2 Seeker missiles for 5 points each, they're 72-inch range, heavy 1, strength 9, AP -3 and damage 2d3. They're very similar to Imperial Hunter-Killer missiles now, so the tank can just fire them directly, though they do have a stratagem to help them out a bit if they need. For 5 points they really don't seem too bad to me. I think a pair of these do have a pretty decent chance of making their points back against hard targets. Otherwise, for the support weapon systems, you've got the choice between the smart missile systems, accelerator burst cannons, or gun drones. The gun drones are free and just blaze away at ballistic skill 5+ with 8 pulse carbine shots. Their range has been extended to 24 inches now though, which is nice. But I think I'd be more tempted to upgrade to either the smart missiles or the accelerator burst cannons, which are +5 points each. The smart missiles are 30-inch range, are heavy 4, strength 5, AP -1, damage 1. It still ignores line of sight and light cover. They've got a decent range, and that synergizes quite well with the Hammerhead wanting to sit back a bit. Pretty handy to be able to clear out some enemy chaff infantry in the midfield, even if they're hiding out of line of sight. The accelerator burst cannons trade range for raw damage. These are massively more dangerous than they were in the previous version of the Codex. 18-inch range, assault 8 weapons with strength 6, AP -1 and damage 1. To be honest, they're a pretty scary threat in their own right against light infantry, though of course they do mean that you have to play a bit more aggressive with the Hammerhead to get within that fairly short range. I think for me I'd be tempted to upgrade to either the smart missiles or the accelerator burst cannon, depending on how you want to play with the unit. I think the smart missiles will still be my default option. Having a bit of fairly quality ignores line of sight firepower is no bad thing. Overall though, just spectacular improvements on the previous datasheet. It does indeed look like these are going to be a competitive unit for the Tau Codex. So then maybe the biggest question is how to extract more value out of an already scary datasheet, so let's take a look at some buffs and synergies. First up we have the army's tactical philosophy. Which one you're going for I think will depend more on the rest of the list, as the Hammerheads aren't really the ones that want to be getting close, but I certainly feel that their Alpha Strike potential is really amped up by Montcar. Being able to advance and shoot for no penalty whatsoever is really nice for the Hammerheads. potentially scooting anywhere up to 18 inches per turn. Both of them have pretty decent buffs to close range damage output though, which would work quite well with those burst cannons, and fall back and shoot certainly doesn't hurt for Carrion, though of course that is much more of a late game thing. I think marker lights are going to be near mandatory for this. I'd certainly plan to have enough available to support all the hammerheads in the army. It works particularly well with that railgun's targeting array, giving you a very reliable shot to land on the target. Character-wise, as the Hammerhead isn't really a core unit, most of the characters don't really do much for it. The one exception is Longstrike, the Hammerhead commander, and his buffing ability has been reined in a bit in the new Codex. He counts as one Hammerhead nearby within 6 inches, as being able to get a marker light for free when it targets an enemy unit. Pretty handy to know that one will be hitting on 3s regardless, never mind Longstrike who already does. I'm afraid he can no longer make an entire trio of Hammerheads +1 to hit though. Sept-wise, I certainly think that some do more for their Hammerheads than others. Both Tau and the Farside Enclaves can both get you a wound reroll every time the model shoots. Again, that's really nice extra reliability with the railgun. Rerolling those very sad rolls of 1 will be just about the highest value that you can get out of those rerolls, and probably save you some command rerolls. As well as that, Tau also have their +1 to wound stratagem. That could be pretty good with the ion cannon, and Farsight counters having marker light tokens when they're up close. Maybe not the biggest deal with the hammerheads, but could help out if the enemy does get a bit too close. Otherwise, I think that perhaps Sakir and Borkan are some of the other more interesting ranged seps. Sakir could get you a -1 to hit at greater than 18 inches, which is quite nice as hammerheads are quite happy sitting back, and no heavy weapon penalty in melee doesn't hurt either. Where Borkan give you the +4 inch range boost and -1 strength against any strength attacks that are strength 7 or lower. Again, not a terrible combo. The range would help out those burst cannons and smart missiles, and the strength thing would actually genuinely help hammerheads not get whittled down by small arms, which they're often wounded on 5s. I think for an army that wants to spam hammerheads though, I think Tau or Farside Enclaves are going to be hard to turn down. There's also quite a bunch of hammerhead relevant stratagems, plenty of more generic shooting buffs, but these are the more specific ones for the hammerhead itself. Backup AI could restore your hitting power, counting as 4 wounds remaining for a turn, which is very relevant when you're hitting on 6s. Designated tasking is the one to disembark drones if you are just keeping the hammerhead cheap. Could be handy if you just need a nuisance unit to jump out or sit on an objective or something. Frequency lock is that seeker missile one, giving you +1 to wound and no line of sight if the enemy has a marker light on them. Could be nice to allow you to strike against something that a marker light can see but your hammerhead can't. And submunitions is the railgun one, where you roll 1d6 for every single model in your target unit. On a 4+, you deal a mortal wound to them, +1 if there's 11 or more models in the squad. In reality, I think that's a fairly low value one. It does replace the railgun's awesome damage profile, so it's only really any good if you've got no hard targets to fire at, and if the enemy's got a big horde maybe of 11+ models. Overall though, hammerheads really do seem like a unit that don't need all that much support. Hover around in the backfield, use their range to keep safe, put the smack down with some railguns, and maybe use some smart missiles to worry the enemy in the midfield. So here's a little bit of math comparing the railgun and the ion cannon damage output. I think it is pretty terrifying to have a very decent chance of just one-shotting a 10 wound toughness 7 vehicle. 62% chance if you're just firing with the standard gun, 74% chance if you've got a marker light, and going up even higher if you can spare a command point reroll for the wound roll, or if you're Tau or Farside Enclaves. The chance of one-shotting an 11 wound vehicle drops off significantly, but I would bear in mind that there's a fairly reasonable chance of just leaving the thing on just 1 wound remaining, fairly easy to finish off for other units. In particular, the railgun's really good against any high invul or -1 damage units, both of which are pretty common in 40k these days, and if you do manage to wound, it's pretty efficient against heavy infantry. Weaknesses wise, obviously it's very swingy, either you get all that damage output or none of it, and perhaps some of the better counters are things that make you wound on a 4+, say Necron Quantum Shielding or Space Marine Transhuman Physiology. At least against tanks and hard targets, the ion cannons just really don't compete very well, I think, only doing 4 or 5 wounds on average to a toughness 7 vehicle, where the railgun does 7 wounds on average, even unbuffed. And the mortal wounds really mean that the railgun isn't significantly behind the ion cannon against a lot of relevant infantry targets either. For 10 points, I just don't really see the ion cannons as being particularly worth it. Maybe just not the best balanced choices on the datasheet. Finally, here's just a little bit of maths that compares the railgun hammerhead to a few competitors for long-range fire support within the Tau Codex. I've used average damage output for these numbers, assuming that you can get a marker light on your target first. I've ignored the smart missiles, but basically all of the rest of these have got plenty of secondary weapon systems as well that they can also fire. With a marker light, the hammerhead averages around about 8 wounds against a toughness 7 vehicle, 6 or 7 against a toughness 8, and still 6 wounds against a really tough target like a Plague Burst Crawler with toughness 8, a 5+ invul and -1 damage. It's also pretty mobile, could be good as a source for command point rerolls to turn them into damage, and maybe does have a bit more potential for overkill than a few of these other choices. Compared to broadsides with rail rifles for 90 points, they do actually a little bit better against toughness 8 vehicles, very similar against toughness 7, and only 4 wounds to the Plague Burst Crawler. They do feel like a very different unit though. The broadsides certainly have a lot of options for support. They get more smart missile shots for the points cost, are a core infantry unit, can get a free support system, though I guess admittedly they do move a fair bit slower. In general, just for general purpose anti-tank, the broadsides might actually be superior, but of course just don't have the sheer reliability of ploughing straight through invul saves no questions asked. The Skyray I do think is perhaps just a little bit inferior to the Hammerhead. The missile rack can now be fired every turn with D3+1 missiles coming out of it, and point for point is just a little bit worse than the Hammerhead against all targets. It does bring an extra marker light to the table though, so that's not nothing. Finally, against the Storm Surge, which I equipped with a pulse blast cannon and assume that the target is within 24 inches, but the Storm Surge has had to move to get within that range. Again, it's not so different from the broadsides in terms of raw damage. Against a toughness 7 vehicle, it does about 8 wounds, same to the toughness 8. But again, it's worse than the Railgun against the target with the invul save and -1 damage, only 4.5 wounds compared with the Railgun's 6. Those numbers do also include the destroyer missiles as well, which it'll only ever be able to get 2 rounds of firing from, though it doesn't include the potential for rerolls to hit if it does stay still. I think the Storm Surge is definitely a very valid competitor though, particularly with how much tougher it's got, and it does have some very decent secondary weapon systems. Overall though, I certainly do think that the Hammerhead competes very well with these options. For raw anti-tank weapons, I think the broadside might be one of the best competitors due to being core and getting access to a lot of buffs. It'll be interesting to see whether people choose to take the big ignores invul threat over that. So let me know what you think of the new incarnation of the Hammerhead then, down in the comments below, and feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more videos like this. I'll be hoping to cover a fair few more revamped Tau units, as well as do a full review of the Codex when I can. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the content on the channel, I would just like to mention the channel's Patreon page, which is down in the video description. It is what supports me to keep on making these videos, and it's quite a big motivation to keep on making them, even when my vocal cords are trying to give up on me. I do try and give a fair few benefits for patrons, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.